Have you ever wondered why you feel exhausted after 8 hours of sitting at a desk, why Sunday night fills you with dread, or why you need 3 cups of coffee just to feel human enough to start your workday? What if I told you that this isn't a personal failing, but the predictable result of an economic system designed to extract maximum value from your life force while convincing you that your burnout is your own responsibility? What if the very freedom that modern work promises, this idea that you can choose your career and build your success through merit and effort, is actually a sophisticated form of psychological control that would make the factory bosses of the 1800s weep with envy? The statistics are staggering, and they paint a picture that should terrify anyone paying attention. According to the World Health Organization, burnout is now classified as an occupational phenomenon affecting over 76% of employees. The American Psychological Association reports that work-related stress costs the economy over $300 billion annually in healthcare, absenteeism, and turnover. But here's what's truly alarming. Suicide rates among working-age adults have increased by 35% since 1999, with the highest spikes occurring in professions that embody the modern flexible work model. Depression rates have tripled in the last decade. Anxiety disorders affect 40 million adults, and chronic fatigue syndrome diagnoses have skyrocketed alongside the rise of what economists call the gig economy and entrepreneurial culture. These aren't random health crises. These aren't personal weaknesses or individual character flaws. These are the systematic, predictable consequences of implementing economic theories that treat human beings as units of production while selling this exploitation as freedom and opportunity. The architect of much of our modern work culture was Milton Friedman, the Nobel Prize-winning economist whose theories about free market, individual responsibility, and competitive capitalism became the blueprint for how we organize work in the 21st century. Friedman promised that free market capitalism would create unprecedented freedom, choice, and prosperity. He argued that when individuals compete in open market, pursuing their rational self-interest, the invisible hand of the market would create optimal outcomes for everyone. But what actually happened when we built our work culture on Friedman's principle? We created the most psychologically destructive work environment in human history, one that systematically breaks down mental health while convincing workers that their suffering is evidence of their personal inadequacy. Today, I'm going to reveal 7 specific mechanisms by which modern work culture, built on Friedmanian economic principle, is literally killing you slowly, and why this conversation has been systematically suppressed by the very forces that profit from your exhaustion. The first mechanism is what I call the rationality trap, and it stems directly from Friedman's theory of rational choice. Friedman believed that individuals always make rational decisions based on complete information and personal preferences. In the workplace, this translates to the idea that if you're struggling, stressed, or unhappy at work, you simply need to make better choices. You should optimize your productivity, manage your time more efficiently, or find a job that better matches your skills and preferences. This theory assumes that labor markets operate like perfect markets where workers have complete information and unlimited options. But here's the devastating reality that research from Harvard Medical School and Stanford Center for Professional Development reveals. The average worker today processes 34% more information daily than workers did just 20 years ago, makes over 35,000 decisions per day, and operates in an environment where the rules, expectations, and definitions of success change constantly. Neurological studies show that this level of cognitive load literally rewires the brain, creating chronic activation of stress hormones that impair decision-making capacity, emotional regulation, and creative thinking. The rationality that Friedman's theory depends on becomes neurologically impossible under the working conditions that his economic model creates. When you feel overwhelmed at work, when you can't seem to make the right choices to improve your situation, when you feel like you're failing despite working harder than ever, your brain is actually operating exactly as it evolved under conditions of chronic stress and information overload. The system has created the precise conditions that make rational choice impossible, then blamed you for not making rational choices. This isn't personal failure. This is systematic psychological manipulation, designed to keep you believing that the solution to systemic problem lies in individual optimization. The second mechanism is the flexibility illusion, rooted in Friedman's advocacy for labor market deregulation and flexible employment. Friedman argued that removing regulations and allowing more flexible work arrangements would give workers greater freedom to balance their personal and professional lives while giving employers the ability to create more efficient, responsive organizations. The promise was that flexibility would reduce stress and increase satisfaction for everyone involved. The research tells a different story entirely. Studies from the University of Cambridge and the London School of Economics show that workers in flexible arrangements report 67% higher levels of anxiety, work an average of 13 more hours per week than traditional employees, and experience what researchers call temporal sovereignty loss, the inability to predict or control their time. The flexibility marketed as freedom has become what occupational psychologists now recognize as ubiquitous availability expectation, the assumption that you are always accessible, always ready to work, always optimizing your performance. When your job expects you to be available evenings and weekends, when your income depends on accepting projects with impossible deadlines, when you must constantly compete against other freelance or gig workers' opportunity, you haven't gained flexibility. You've accepted a work arrangement where your entire life becomes work territory. Your home becomes an office, your personal time becomes potential work time, and your relationships become secondary to your professional availability. This isn't freedom. This is the complete colonization of your existence by market demands. The third mechanism I call entrepreneurial exhaustion, and it flows directly from Friedman's celebration of individual responsibility and entrepreneurial spirit. Friedman promoted the idea that in free markets, individuals who work hard, take risks, and pursue opportunities will naturally succeed, while those who fail simply haven't tried hard enough or made smart enough choices. This logic has been extended to create what researchers call entrepreneurial subjectivity, the expectation that every worker should think and act like an entrepreneur, constantly developing their personal brand, networking, acquiring new skills, and treating themselves as a business. Clinical psychology research from Yale and Columbia universities reveals that this entrepreneurial pressure creates what's known as optimization anxiety, a chronic state of stress caused by impossible demand to constantly improve, constantly compete, constantly prove your value in an unstable market. Workers report feeling like they can never do enough, never learn enough, never network enough to feel secure. The entrepreneurial mindset that was supposed to create empowerment instead creates a form of psychological imprisonment where your self-worth becomes entirely dependent on your market performance. When you feel like you should be doing more to advance your career, when you spend your free time taking online courses or attending networking events, when you treat your personal relationships as opportunities for professional advancement, you are not being entrepreneurial. You're being exploited by a system that has convinced you to provide your own management, your own training, your own motivation, and your own quality control while absorbing all the risks that employers used to bear. You've become your own boss in the worst possible way. You're working for a boss who never gives you time off and never pays you enough. The fourth mechanism is what I term competition toxicity, emerging from Friedman's belief that competition naturally produces optimal outcomes. Friedman argued that when workers compete against each other for positions, promotions, and opportunities, this competition drives innovation, efficiency, and excellence. The theory suggests that competitive pressure motivates people to perform their best while ensuring that the most capable individuals rise to the top. Neuroscience research from MIT and the National Institute of Mental Health shows that chronic competitive pressure activates the same neurological pathways as physical threats, creating persistent fight or flight responses that damage cognitive function, immune response, and emotion regulation. Workers in highly competitive environments show increased cortisol levels, decreased empathy, impaired collaborative ability, and higher rates of anxiety and depression. The competition that was supposed to bring out the best in people systematically brings out the worst while destroying the social connections that make work meaningful. When your workplace pits you against your colleagues for limited resources, when your success depends on others' failure, when you feel like you can't trust the people you work with because they're also your competition, you're experiencing the toxic byproducts of treating human cooperation as market competition. Humans evolved to succeed through collaboration, support, and collective problem solving. Forcing cooperative beings into competitive frameworks doesn't create excellence. It creates psychological damage and social isolation. The fifth mechanism I call efficiency tyranny, stemming from Friedman's prioritization of economic efficiency above all other values. Friedman believed that markets naturally optimize for efficiency, and that this efficiency benefits everyone by reducing costs, improving quality, and maximizing productivity. In workplace terms, this means constantly measuring, tracking, and optimizing every aspect of human performance to eliminate waste and maximize output. Research from occupational health specialists at Johns Hopkins and the Mayo Clinic reveals that efficiency-focused work environments create what psychologists call human devaluation syndrome, the systematic treatment of people as machines that can be optimized, measured, and replaced when they become inefficient. Workers report feeling like their humanity, creativity, and individual needs are obstacles to overcome rather than assets to develop. The constant pressure to be more efficient creates chronic stress, burnout, and what researchers term existential emptiness, the feeling that your work has no meaning beyond producing measurable outputs. When you feel like a cog in a machine, when your worth is determined by metrics that reduce your complex human capabilities to simple numbers, when you're constantly being monitored and measured and optimized, you're not experiencing efficiency. You're experiencing the systematic dehumanization that occurs when human beings are treated as production units rather than thinking, feeling, creative individuals with needs, limits, and intrinsic value. The sixth mechanism is what I call the individualization of systemic problems, perhaps the most insidious aspect of Friedmanian thinking applied to workplace culture. Friedman's emphasis on individual responsibility and personal choice creates a framework where all workplace problems are treated as individual failures rather than systemic issues. If you're stressed, you need better stress management skills. If you're burned out, you need better work-life balance. If you're struggling financially, you need better personal finance skills or career choices. Epidemiological studies from the Centers for Disease Control and leading public health institutions show that when workplace problems are individualized, they become exponentially harder to solve and create additional psychological damage through shame, isolation, and self-blame. Workers suffering from systemic issues believe they are personally defective, which prevents them from seeking help, advocating for change, or recognizing that their problems are shared by millions of others facing identical systemic pressures. When you blame yourself for not being able to handle workplace stress that previous generations would have recognized as obviously unreasonable, when you feel ashamed for struggling with working conditions that are objectively harmful, when you think you need to fix yourself rather than recognize that the system needs to be fixed, you're experiencing the psychological manipulation that keeps exploitative systems in place. Your problems aren't personal failures, they're predictable responses to systemic dysfunction. The seventh and final mechanism is what I call freedom inversion, the ultimate contradiction of Friedmanian workplace culture. Friedman promised that free market capitalism would maximize individual freedom by allowing people to make their own choices about work, lifestyle, and success. The theory suggests that when you can choose your job, your employer, your career path, and your level of effort, you achieve true freedom and self-determination. But longitudinal studies from the European Center for Social Welfare Policy and Research and the American Institute of Stress reveal that workers today report lower levels of autonomy, control, and life satisfaction than workers in previous generations, despite having more theoretical choices available. The freedom to choose has become the obligation to choose correctly, and the responsibility for your choices has become the burden of constant self-optimization in an unstable, unpredictable market. When every aspect of your life becomes a choice you must make correctly, when your security depends on predicting unpredictable market, when your freedom becomes the responsibility to constantly compete and optimize and perform, you haven't gained freedom. You've accepted a sophisticated form of control that makes you responsible for managing your own exploitation while believing that this management represents freedom. These 7 mechanisms work together to create what occupational psychologists now recognize as systematic psychological extraction, the organized removal of mental and emotional resources from workers while convincing them that this extraction represents opportunity, freedom, and personal growth. The system has become so sophisticated at disguising exploitation as empowerment that workers often defend the very practices that are destroying their mental health. Let me synthesize this for you in the clearest possible terms. First, the rationality trap convinces you that systemic problems are personal choice failures. Second, the flexibility illusion transforms your entire life into work territory while calling this invasion freedom. Third, entrepreneurial exhaustion makes you responsible for providing your own management, training, and motivation while absorbing all employment risks. Fourth, competition toxicity destroys human cooperation and social connection in the name of excellence. Fifth, efficiency tyranny treats you as a machine to be optimized rather than a human being with intrinsic value. Sixth, the individualization of systemic problems prevents collective action by making you believe you are personally defective. Seventh, freedom inversion transforms choice into obligation and autonomy into responsibility for your own exploitation. Here's the central contradiction that Milton Friedman's theories created when applied to human work. The promise of freedom through market choice has become the reality of control through individual responsibility for market outcomes. You have been given the freedom to choose your own exploitation and the responsibility to manage your own psychological destruction while believing that both represent personal empowerment and professional opportunity. The reason nobody talks about this openly is that acknowledging these mechanisms would require admitting that our entire economic system is designed to extract value from human suffering while disguising this extraction as individual opportunity. The businesses, institutions, and political systems that profit from this arrangement have every incentive to maintain the illusion that your work-related stress, anxiety, depression, and exhaustion are personal problems requiring individual solutions. But here's what you can do right now to begin protecting yourself from these mechanisms. Start by recognizing that your workplace stress is not a personal failure, but a predictable response to systemic dysfunction. When you feel overwhelmed, exhausted, or inadequate at work, remind yourself that you are experiencing the intended effects of a system designed to extract maximum value from your mental and emotional resources. This recognition alone breaks the first mechanism by refusing to accept individual responsibility for systemic problems. Second, begin practicing what I call psychological sovereignty, the deliberate creation of mental and emotional spaces that exist outside of market logic. This means protecting time, relationships, and activities that have value beyond their economic productivity. When you defend your right to rest, to have unmeasured experiences, to maintain relationships that don't advance your career, you're practicing resistance to the mechanisms that would colonize your entire existence. Third, start having conversations with others about these mechanisms. Share this analysis with colleagues, friends, and family members. The individualization of systemic problems depends on isolation and shame. When people begin recognizing that their workplace suffering is shared, predictable, and systemically created, the psychological control begins to break down and collective solutions become possible. The consequence of understanding these mechanisms is not despair but liberation. When you recognize that your workplace suffering is not evidence of personal inadequacy, but proof of systemic dysfunction, you stop wasting energy trying to fix yourself and start directing that energy toward protecting and working with others to create alternatives. When you understand that the freedom promised by market capital has become a sophisticated form of psychological control, you can begin practicing actual freedom by refusing to accept responsibility for problems you didn't create and cannot individually. Your exhaustion is not a personal failing. Your stress is not evidence of weakness. Your struggle to find meaning and satisfaction in work that treats you as a production unit is not a character flaw. These are rational, healthy responses to an irrational, unhealthy system. The first step toward reclaiming your life is recognizing the problem is not you. The problem is a system that profits from convincing you that the problem is you. The time has come to stop managing your own exploitation and start recognizing it for what it is. Your life, your health, your relationships, and your mental well-being are not acceptable casualties in someone else's pursuit of efficiency and profit. You have the right to work that supports rather than destroys human flourishing, and recognizing that right is the first step toward claiming it.